I'd like to start off by saying that welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar where we will be looking at the results of a survey that we did of clergy on these issues of financial capability. But to let you know that right now in the field, we have the same survey which has gone out to lay employees. Not only is the survey gone out to lay employees, and we hope that they'll all fill it out, but on top of that, by filling it out, for every survey that is filled out, CPG will donate $5 to Episcopal Relief and Development COVID Relief Fund. And so you're not just doing it, for us to give us a better idea about lay employees on these really important issues, but you will be helping Episcopal Relief and Development at the same time. Everyone who has a pension product in the DC or DB plan at CPG should have gotten a survey. If you have not gotten a survey within the past few weeks, and that will come from either CPG research or even I was sort of sent it as well, please do reach out to me, mprice@cpg.org. If you're a lay employee and you feel like you should have gotten a survey, but you haven't. So please do that. And, so we'll be able to do this again. And we'll actually be able to feature the data from lay employees at a future date. Let me introduce, it is my tremendous honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Andrea Hassler. She is the professor at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center at the George Washington University School of Business. She got her PhD from the University of Basel, or Bâle, depending on what train you're coming on or where that train is coming from, Germany or France. And so, her PhD topic was household financial decisions, the effects on retirement planning of asset prices. And so, gosh, if ever there was a timely topic, it is that. And so obviously we did this survey going back before COVID-19, before everything about that, but I can't think of anybody better to have with us at this time. Andrea does so much work on not only financial knowledge, but issues around financial fragility and questions around retirement preparedness. And so it is great to have you there. With us also is somebody who probably anyone who's ever been to a PFW has met, Patty Christensen, of our Education and Wellness Department, and a fabulous resource. What Patty doesn't know about CPG, about retirement readiness, about all of those things is really not worth knowing. It wouldn't fit on a postcard, probably wouldn't fit on a postage stamp. And so it is great to have Patty with us. She will talk about some of the education and wellness programs, things that we're learning, things that we're doing, as well as always in a position to answer practical questions. So without further ado, I will come back later. Let me hand it over to Professor Hassler to give you the fascinating results of the survey that I know many of you took. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matthew. So, Jermaine, I should have access control now, correct? And can...
Yes, you do.
So let me see. Right now, it's still not working. Oh, now here, perfect, great, thank you. I love technology. I've learned so much over the past 9 years while I'm working from home. So thank you so much, Matthew, for this great introduction. And I'm very excited to be here in this webinar and talk about the survey we did and the research we did. So as Matthew said, I am with the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center I started there right after my PhD, and I've been with GFLEG for the past 3 years now. So GFLEG, just a little bit of a background, GFLEG was founded in 2011, and we are at the George Washington University School of Business here in DC. And our founder is Professor Anna Maria Lusardi, who started the entire field on financial literacy. So we do a lot of research. Let's see, can I go forward? Jermaine, up here, so okay. Just have to be a little bit more patient, I feel. Oh, no, I was too fast. Is it working? Yeah, okay, so here. Perfect. So yes, we do a lot of research around financial literacy, financial capability, financial fragility. And with that research, we want to inform policy, but also people and organizations who develop programs, financial education in the school, the workplace, and also the community. So we actually live in an environment where we have a lot of questions and a lot of decisions to make, which are complex. And it can start right now, which is very prevalent. How can we best prepare for emergency situations? So how can we build precautionary savings? Then there are also questions, how will my work be tomorrow? So what is required? How do I invest? How do I invest in skills? What do I have to invest into? What education do I have to take? Then is also another question, the long-term question, will my pension be enough? So saving for the future, I have to plan, how much do I need to actually live comfortably during my retirement? So how much do I save now? How much do I need to save now? Then another question is also, how can I grow my savings? So how can I make my money work for me? That's especially important now in an environment where we have 0 interest rates on our bank account. So how do I invest in, and what's the best portfolio choice? And then there are further questions on how can I help others? So caretaking, if I have children at home, if I take care of my parents, for example, that also can have impact on my personal finances, because maybe I cannot work full time. So the question is, are we prepared to make those decisions? No. There's a little bit, I'm pushing the button, but it's not, here we go. So the question is, are we prepared to make these decisions? And that's exactly why we do, and why we collect surveys, so that we can actually see where are people at, what's their financial situation, what's their money management behavior, and then with that we can inform programs and we can provide resources so that people are prepared to exactly make those decisions, and especially feel comfortable to make these decisions. So what we did when we collaborated with the Church Pension Group, we did that survey among clergy. And the data was collected in November and December 2018. And we got actually results from over 1,000 individuals. So the sample is 1,053 people. That's a really nice result and a lot of data we can work with. This was great. So then what was included in the survey? We had 38 questions included. And the questions span from financial literacy to financial situation and money management behavior. Then what we did, we used the findings from the clergy sample and compared it to comparison group. So what I also have access to is a nationally representative sample. It's called the National Financial Capability Study, which has over 100 questions. Also questions on financial literacy, financial situation, money management behavior, capability. And that's actually the biggest data set that's available. And we have 27,000 households that are surveyed every 3 years. So with that, I can actually look now at the clergy sample and compare the findings with that comparison group. But we didn't look at the entire group. We actually chose a subsample to compare with, which has similar demographics as the clergy sample. And the subsample we looked at are those who are at least 25 years old, have a bachelor's or a postgrad degree, and are employed full-time or part-time. So what do we do with these findings? And that's actually what Patty will talk about at the end of my presentation. We want to inform program direction. We also, with the findings, she's actually updating the CPG curriculum, and also with the research finding, and I hope also with this webinar, we can actually help raise awareness. In the first part, I'd like to talk a little bit first about financial literacy and how do we measure financial literacy. So the ABC of personal finances are actually the big three questions. So as I said, the founder of GFLAG, Anna Maria Luzardi, with her longtime collaborator, Olivia Mitchell, in 2009, they invented or came up with the big three questions, or over the time, there are actually three questions, and over the time they got the name, the big three. And the three financial literacy questions test the knowledge of fundamental financial concepts. And these concepts are interest rate, inflation, and risk diversification. I won't talk about those questions right now because what we have them included as a poll throughout the presentation so that you actually have the ability to answer them right away during this webinar. So what were the main findings? And that's why I have the globe here on the right hand side. We have those questions included in many countries around the world. But what we see is actually that financial literacy is widespread in the population, and not just in the US, but across the globe. And that basic knowledge cannot be taken for granted, even in advanced economies. And when you look at the three concepts, risk diversification is the fundamental concept that most people have difficulties with. And then also we have vulnerable groups in the population who are less likely to answer the big three correctly. And these are, for example, minorities, women, the younger, those with lower education and with lower income. And these are patterns that we see across countries. Now for the US, actually, just in general, we see that only 30% of Americans could correctly answer the big three questions in 2018. Now you might think, okay, that's actually, I can learn, but I will learn those topics while I am on the go, while I have to make those decisions. But now there is this graph that I brought with me to show that actually the learning is happening only slowly. So here we have the graph of the percentage of people who can answer the big three questions correctly, split by age groups. So on the very left, you see the youngest population, 18 to 24 years old. Only 13% could answer the big three questions correctly. On the other end, you have the people which are 75 years old or older, and among them, 45% could answer the big three questions correctly. So by age 50, only 32% could actually answer the big three questions correctly, even though at that time you have done a lot of financial literacy, a lot of financial decision making already. So that shows me that learning by doing doesn't do the trick. So we need to really provide financial education, because with financial education, we can step up financial literacy levels across the population. Now I believe we have our first quiz, which you can answer right away. Charmaine, do you want to pull it up? So the question is, that's the interest rate question. And the question we have asked, suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much would you have in your bank account if you left the money to grow? And the possible options are more than 102, exactly 102, or less than 102. Or you can also answer, I don't know.
All right, the poll is in progress now. Oh, we have over 51% of you have voted. We're going to keep it open a little longer. All right, so I'm going to give everyone 5 seconds until we close the poll. Get your last votes in now in 5, 4, 3, 2, and the poll is closing. I will let you all know that if you do not see the poll, please feel free to go to the questions window and type in what you think the answer would be. And once again, I can tell you, number 1, more than $102. Number 2, exactly $102. Number 3, less than $102. And last, don't know. So I'm going to share the results now.
Great, I love it, because that's exactly correct, more than 102. And that's exactly also what your colleagues in the survey said. Do I have? Yes, perfect, exactly, 102. So your colleagues in the survey, 87% got this question correct. So now let's look when we talk about, we already talked a little bit about the survey, so now let's look how the clergy sample did. So when we look at the big 3 questions correct, 76%, so the dark blue bar, we are looking first at the 2 bars on the left-hand side. The dark blue bar is the CPG sample, the clergy sample, and the light blue bar is our comparison group, the sample from the nationally representative sample, the NFCS sample. And 76% among clergy got the big 3 questions correct. This is a larger amount than compared to the NFCS, where only 49% got the big 3 questions correct. So this was actually a great result for me to see that the clergy did so much better compared to the NFCS. Now, what we also added in here in the survey were 3 additional questions. They were not more complex or complicated. They were just testing different topics. And so when we look at all 6 questions correct, it is a lower amount. So only 26% among clergy could actually answer the 6 questions correct. What we also included in there in our question is we asked what people thought about how much they think they know. And we saw that 68% of CPG members, of clergies, assessed their overall financial knowledge as high or very high. And that was a surprising result to me because it's very much in line with the actual knowledge. So if you compare the 68% who think they know a lot about financial literacy, that's actually matched with the 76% who can actually correctly answer the big 3 questions. And that was surprising to me because usually in surveys, what I see is overconfident. So that more people actually think they know than they actually do. So when we also compare to the NFCS sample, so in the nationally representative sample, 80% think they actually know a lot about personal finances versus their actual financial knowledge is only 49%. Now, what we also did is, because sometimes only looking at averages is not enough. We want to split the sample into groups. And as we saw before with my nice chart with financial literacy across different ages, we also split the sample here into younger and older clergy to see whether there is this dynamic. And yes, it is. So we see that financial literacy is lower among the younger. So the dark green bar here are the people who are between 25 and 50-year-olds. And then the light green bar are the people who are older than 50. And on the left-hand side, you have the CPG sample, the clergy sample. On the right-hand side, we have the comparison group. So what we see with both groups, that the younger know less than the older cohort. And that can be because of the learning by doing, what I explained before. But what's really nice here, a nice result for the clergy sample, is that that difference between the younger and the older is not significant. So that means, in research terms, that difference, what you see there, is actually not really not really measurable. So they are basically knowing exactly the same same amount. And that's the first result here. Then the second result, when you compare the dark green bars between the CPG sample and the NFCS sample, what we actually see is that the CPG sample, that the younger cohort knows much more than the comparison group, than their peers in the NFCS sample. So 73% could answer the big three correctly versus 43% in the NFCS. And I believe that this is due to the financial education that CPG is also offering to their clergies. Now, we also did actually split the sample between men and women, because what I see around the globe is actually that there is a big difference between men and women when it comes to financial literacy, so that women know less than men. And here in green, we actually have men, the financial literacy rate among men, and in yellow among women. But what's really nice to see here is that among the clergy, that difference is again not significant, so not measurable. So women and men know exactly the same, basically. But all around the world in my research, I see that there is a gender gap. Now, I talked before, I mentioned already that we actually had 6 questions included. And here I broke it down, the percentages of the people who answered each and every single question correctly. And again, in dark blue, we have the CPG sample, and in light blue, we have the NFCS, the comparison group. The first 3 questions are the big 3 questions. And we saw already with the poll you did, 87%, and among the webinar participants here, it's even 90% who got the interest rate question correct. Now we have the inflation and risk diversification, which we will look into in a minute. But then we also added a bond pricing question, which actually goes into or asks about the knowledge on the connection, the relationship between the interest rate and bond prices, the negative relationship between interest rate and bond prices. And we see there that among both samples, that's a concept that's really hard to grasp for people. So only 40% among the CPG sample could actually answer that correctly. And then we have another question included, which tests the knowledge on compound interest rate, and the 6th one, which is around mortgages. The compound interest rate is actually asking, if you have a loan of $1,000, how long, and the interest rate is 20%, how long will it take for the money to double? And we see also there that actually CPG members have little difficulty answering that question correctly. So now we have the second quiz here, which is around inflation. So the question is, imagine that interest rate on your savings account was 1% per year and the inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year with the money in this account, would you be able to buy more than today, exactly the same as today, or less than today?
And the poll has launched. And don't forget, just in case you're not seeing the poll or you're not able to answer the poll, please know that there are 4 options to answer. 1, more than today. 2, exactly the same as today. 3, less than today. And lastly, 4, don't know. All right, I see the answers coming in. You guys are doing a great job. And with no further ado, I'm going to give you that same 5-second countdown to get your last answers in, whether it's in the poll or through the questions window. And we do have a lot of you in the questions window. Thank you. And we will now close the poll. And drum roll, please. These are the results.
Perfect. You're doing great. Less than today, of course, because inflation was bigger than the interest rate. And that's exactly, if I go now to my next slide, what your colleagues in the survey answered as well. 85% got this question correct. If you want to see the exact question wording, in our report at the very end in the appendix, we have all 6 questions if you're interested. Now I want to go to part 2, which is actually talking about financial situation and money management. And because we are living in an environment right now where we are affected by this current crisis, and we are also our personal finances are affected or might be affected by this crisis, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on where we were at financially before the pandemic started. So our most recent data that I have available was collected in January 2020, so a couple of months ago, right before the pandemic started. And that's the Personal Finance Index. And here, this is again the general population. I have this slide in here because I'd love to give you a little bit of a background on the situation in the US, where are people at financially and their vulnerability. And we actually see in that survey that 33%, so a third of the population, have difficulty making ends meet. We also see that 31% actually are debt constrained. So they say debt and debt payments prevent them from adequately addressing other financial priorities. And 27%, almost a third, could not come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month. That's actually our financial fragility question, and I did a lot of research around that, and I will show you in the next slide how financial fragility evolved over time. And lastly, we have 61% never try to figure out how much they need to save for their retirement. So here, financial fragility over time. So we see right after the financial crisis from 07, 08, we see that 50% in 2009 could not come up with $2,000 within 30 days. And that question actually leaves leaves the opportunities open how you come up with the money. It doesn't need to be on your bank account, in your savings account. It can be that you actually put it on your credit card if there is still limit. You can also, for example, ask family or friends or sell something. So we see over those years that actually financial fragility has decreased over time. And if you remember from the previous slide, I can actually add another bar there in 2020. It was 27% again. But still, even during a time where the economy is stable and was growing, we see that a third of the population could not come up with $2,000 within 30 days. But what I say also on the slide down there, average hide large differences in the population. So we actually, and I can maybe talk a little bit during the Q&A around vulnerable groups, because what we see is that's an average, and within the average we actually have people who are struggling more than others. And just for you a comparison, we also have the exact same question in the clergy sample, and among clergies in 2018 only 7% said they could not come up with $2,000 within 30 days. But we have to take into account that the clergy sample is also a sample with people who are actually older. So the average age is 55-year-old. So they had a little bit more time to accumulate wealth. And then the sample is also people earn more. So the average income was above median. So then let's look into the financial situation and assets and liabilities of clergy members. So here we are back in our sample that we collected in 2018 among clergies. And what we see that actually 85% have a savings account. We see that 60% own a home. And we see that 53% have financial investments like stock, bonds, mutual funds, aside from retirement accounts. So we see clergy have a lot of assets. On the debt side, we see that 38% have credit card debt. And 85% of those who own a home have a mortgage. So that means assets are leveraged. And then 21% have a student loan. Now we also ask the question, overall, if you think about your asset, debt, and savings, how satisfied are you with your current personal financial condition? And what we saw among clergies is that 18%, so 1 in 5, said, I'm not satisfied with my personal financial condition. And 44% said, I'm moderately satisfied. And actually and that's already more than 60%. And 38% said, I'm actually confident or comfortable with my financial situations. And I think that perception about personal finances has a lot to do with feeling overburdened with debt. And we see that 20% among clergy feel to have too much debt right now. That's 2 out of 10. Additional 30% said that they neither agree nor disagree with the statement that they have too much debt right now. And 50% did not feel that they have too much debt right now. But still there are, if you look at the upper bar, there are 50% who actually feel or struggle with debt from time to time. Now I'd love to look into short-term money management. And first I'd love to look around precautionary savings. And what I actually see in the clergy sample, and then I do also the comparison to the NFCS sample. So dark blue is our CPG sample and light blue our NFCS sample. And when we look at the 2 bars to the very left first, we see that among clergy, 39% did not save over the past year. So the question was actually looking at your expenses. Were your expenses bigger, exactly the same, or less than your earnings in the past year? Then when we look at the middle columns, we see that 25%, so a quarter of clergies, have difficulty covering monthly expenses and paying bills, all their bills in a typical month. So remember, that was 2018 where we collected that data. It's not right now, it was in 2018 during a stable economy. And then the last bar is actually 38% among clergy do not set aside emergency or rainy day funds. So we see, if you compare for all those pairs, compare the dark blue with the light blue bar, you see that clergy members do better compared to the NFCS sample. But still, we see that there is room for improvement, because still 38% do not set aside emergency or rainy day funds, for example. Here we go. Now, lastly, I'd also love to talk about expensive short-term money management behavior. So money management behavior that accrues fees. Because, for example, with my credit card, I don't pay the credit card in full. I only pay the minimum, for example, at the end of the month, or I do make cash advances, or I go over the limit. And that's expensive credit card behavior. And we see in the clergy sample that 22% experience those expensive credit card behavior. Then in the middle column, we actually see that 11% overdraw their checking account occasionally. And then the last column, we see that 6% among clergy use alternative financial services, which are pawn shops, payday lenders, rent-to-own stores, or auto title loans. So when you compare, again, the CPG sample with the NFCS sample, yes, clergy members do much better or are less likely to experience expensive short-term money management behavior. And I think this has a lot to do with the high financial literacy rate that we see among clergy. Because what I see in my research is as well that those who are financially literate are less likely to use their credit card in an expensive way and actually have to pay additional fees and charges, or are less likely to use alternative financial services. Now, lastly, I'd love to talk briefly around long-term money management, retirement preparedness. Our last question was, I worry about running out of money in retirement, and 25% among clergy agreed with that statement and said, I worry about running out of money. And 44% neither disagree nor agree with that statement. And that could actually mean, because they are not taking that clear position, that could mean that they do not exactly know how much savings they will have accumulated by the time they retire, or it might also be that they don't really know how much they will need during retirement. And 31% disagreed, so they're not worried about running out of money in retirement. Oh, before I turn over to Patty, and actually we first have our last quiz, I just want to sum up the part 1 and part 2 with this slide, and want to link financial literacy with money management behavior. So what I mentioned already a little bit before is what we see in the research in this survey, but also in all our other research, what we are doing at GFLEG, people who are financially literate are more likely to have precautionary savings. They're less likely to have too much debt, and they're also less likely to engage in expensive money management behavior, what we have just seen, and they're more likely to plan and save for retirement. And now our last and final quiz, and the question, not the answer, the question is, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. True or false, or I don't know.
All right. This one, I'm not going to call it an easy one, but you only have 3 options to choose from, whether it's true, false, or if you just don't know. All right. Oh, look how quick you all vote when it's only 3 options. Okay, so I am only going to make you go through this for another few seconds. The timer is on, and we will be closing this poll in approximately 5 seconds. Get your votes in now. And don't forget, you can also go to the questions window to type in your answer. We will now close the poll. Thank you for all of your responses. And here are the results.
Exactly, perfect. 96%. That's exactly also, that of course it's correct. And what people said, 82% in the clergy sample got this question correct. Thank you very much. And I'll now like to turn over to Patty.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so if you'll just move to the next slide for me, Andrea.
I gotcha.
Oh, good. So I actually was very pleased to see this particular slide because we know that financial education plays an important part of overcoming financial fragility. And it's great to see that CPG is playing a very large part of providing financial education opportunities. We have online tools and different resources. We're doing webinars, certainly in-person conferences. We have individual financial discussions. So I really think that we are providing a lot of different ways for our members to get that education that they need. So let's go on to the next slide. TikTok. Okay, so while we go on to the next slide.
Can you go?
Yeah, because I can't drive, so I'm just. Anyhow, there we go. So the next slide, many of you have probably been to a Planning for Tomorrow conference, or as we now call a Planning for Wellness conference. We partner with the diocese and we try to go out and see the clergy and spouses and partners every 5 years. So I think that's why we have such a large percentage of people familiar and attending those conferences. We also started doing some different seminary visits the last couple of years where we're offering a day and a half conference for seminary students. So as we mentioned, we have started to make some changes to our materials based on the findings of the survey. We certainly see that clergy understand the basics of finance, but implementation in some of these areas really do need some improvement. We've changed some of the messaging on our conferences that, especially on the financial topics, it's more of the, how to do something instead of the why. We find that by giving people more of a tool to learn how to do something makes more sense than just saying to some of them, you should do this, right? We all know we should budget, but really understanding how to do something makes more sense and builds more on financial skills. So there's a couple things that we're looking at is 38% of the clergy are not setting aside money for a reserve fund, and a small, I think it was 37%, were not saving at all last year. So that's something that we're really trying to address. The other thing that we're really looking at is getting people to think about eliminating or reducing those financial fees, things that we don't think about, ATM fees, service fees, credit card fees that Andrea talked a little bit about. Also the importance of saving early and using tax-deferred vehicles such as our retirement savings program, which is a 403B. The other one that if you're familiar with our website, you might know that we have quite a few online courses, and one that we're developing is a 5-year to retirement course, which I hope to have available by this summer, because it's a way for both clergy and lay to start looking at steps towards retirement for both finance and health topics. So we're trying to address a lot of these concerns in a way that's a little bit more towards wellness. and not just, as I said, you should do this, but really helping you understand the different ways to do that. And frankly, we hope, obviously we're not doing conferences at the moment, but once we start to come back to some in-person conferences, we're going to be rolling out this new curriculum. So one other thing I just wanted to mention is that we also have a webinar coming up next week on May 20th and 21st on the topic of psychological first aid, hosted by Jody Hortzman, who's a licensed clinical psychologist. And she's going to discuss how to identify warning signs of distress and a perspective on, post-stress reactions. This is available to the church at large, so anyone can register, clergy, lay, vestry members. So just know that we do have other webinars that we have coming up. So we encourage you to also take a look at our website and see what other webinars are coming. We'll have another 3 or 4 in June. But anyhow, so that's just my take on what we're doing with the survey. We're looking forward to getting the data from the lay survey so we can also see how we can make changes to curriculum and our online learnings to address some of those specific areas.